Okay, our next speakers are again from WVU, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Drs. Matt Wilson and Kevin Shaffer, and they will be speaking to us about animal forage livestock systems.
All right, in case you're confused, I'm Kevin Shaffer. Matt Wilson is sitting there. Do me a favor, everybody stand up. Stand up. The person beside you does not stand up, push them out of their chair and wake them up. All right? All right. Sit back down. Who wants to talk about cows? All right. That's what we're going to do here for the next few minutes. All right. How they apply into this entire system. Thank you, sir. All right. My background is with WVU Extension. I have an extensive outreach role with Raymond Memorial Farm in terms of the bull test program. That's part of my job, to coordinate that program. And some of the technology we have in the facility that we utilize directly integrates into this project long term. And some technology that we're going to install in that system, or in that facility and outside the facility throughout the farm is going to help us work on this nutrient cycling process over time. So today, and if you look in your program there, it talks about animal efficiency. Animal efficiency. Well, there's lots of different ways from an animal production standpoint we can look at efficiency. All right? Different production efficiencies, reproductive efficiency, feed efficiency. Okay? And if we look in general at the U.S. beef industry over time, all right, you'd say we're pretty darn efficient. United States beef production, the most efficient in the world. All right, we produce more beef, all right, about twice as much beef with 40% less cows than we did 40, 50 years ago. We have become much more efficient from a production, from an output standpoint. Okay? All right? This is a little bit of a graph of a genetic trend in yearling weight for different breeds of cattle. All right? So if you think in terms of pounds produced, all right, that trend is continuing to go up over time. We have selected bigger animals. Makes sense, right? That increase in production was a result of an intentional selection. All right, we didn't just get that lucky, picking the right ones over time. Now, if we look at this particular graph, you'll see genetic trend in mature weight and mature height of Angus cattle. Okay, I call this the unintended consequence of that selection for more and more growth. Okay. We can see here the white line is our mature weight. The cows have gotten bigger. The same as we've selected for more growth, we've made bigger and bigger cows. All right? The argument of whether they're more efficient in a lot of different ways is one that if you read Beef Magazine or Drovers, you'll see someone write an article in there about every issue. All right? Expressing their opinion on the most efficient cow size for whatever environment you may be in. All right, the interesting part of this that I find is mature heights in the yellow line. We've kind of kept cows the same height. All right, they're not getting any taller, but they're still getting heavy. All right, we're making them more dense in some ways. We must be making them wider. Right, we don't have a mature width measurement. All right, but I can tell you, especially at the university, we've got some cows that don't fit through those chutes too well, so we've made them wider. All right? They might not rub their back coming through, but they'll rub their sides. Okay? Another thing to illustrate this. This comes as data, and it's a little bit old, but it's U.S. mark data. All right? Medium Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska, and they do gene plasm studies over time. All right? Looking at the different breeds of cattle that are available using current sires in those breeds. All right? And they look at what's the mature weight of the different breeds of cows that are out there. Right? This is a crossbred cow graph, or a table here, all right, but it's denoted by breed of sire. Okay? Let me highlight a couple of these for you. If we were to classify those breeds, if I was in beef production class and I would ask students, if we had to classify those three breeds of cattle, what would they be? Those are our maternal breeds. Okay? The ones that are better at being cows. Right? And if we generally describe maternal breeds, they're moderate mature size, moderate growth rates, all right? right? They're above average fertility, above average milk production. All right? So they vary some with respect to carcass traits. All right? What have we done to them? All right? These down here, the four at the bottom of this list, the terminal breeds, are the ones that should be the high growth, more muscle, more mature side. We flip-flop what they should be with the way we've selected cows. All right? It is what it is now. It's there. We have to deal with it, right? So how do we go about that process? All right? Let's look at this. This is from the University of Georgia, some cow-calf operation budgets and how those expenses get distributed across different aspects of the operation. Okay? And if we look at that, 70% of our production cost is feed related. All right? Doesn't take a genius to figure out what the low-hanging fruit is here that we can make a change in. All right? Feed costs account for 70% of the total production cost. The other component of that, all right, is the fact that about 70% of that, this component here, is used for maintenance. Right? Just to keep the cow alive. We do not use that feed to get any productive capacity, whether it be growth in a young growing animal or growth of a fetus or lactation in a cow, right? in mature animals. We're using total, when we multiply that together, about half of our total cost of production is just to keep our animals alive. All right? So if there is a means for us to change that cost to keep animals alive, then we can change our bottom line. We can change our cost of production. The other thing to think about this is, on average, this is going to be our 70% is our feed costs, but as feed requirements are correlated to what? Size. Bigger cows eat more. We make bigger cows. All right? Do we need really small cows? Well, we lose production efficiency if we make cows too small. All right? So there's a balance. Right? What can we do within a cow that is efficient from a production standpoint to select for a cow that is more feed efficient? Okay? I'll give you a list of measures of feed efficiency, okay, that are available in the literature. It's very interesting reading. There's a little bit of sarcasm in that. Right? You've got to want to read it. All right? But there's really two that have impacted the industry. First, feed conversion ratio. Feed to gain or gain to feed. It doesn't matter really how you put that together. All right? This is what we thought was our gold standard for feed efficiency in the beef industry. We utilized this for the past 40, 50 years. What did we do? We made cattle that gained faster and were much bigger by selecting for this. Right? Why did they do that? Because they could eat more. Right? We selected for appetite. Okay? Then there's this other measure. Right? It was actually introduced. The original work to introduce this was done in the 60s. However, we didn't have the technology to make it widespread until much more recently. Residual feed intake, or RFI. All right? The important thing about RFI is when we look at the rest of these measures of feed efficiency, this is the only one that accounts for that feed that goes to maintenance. That half of our total cost of production is maintenance feed. Right? That's what makes this what we're really excited about and have been working with for a number of years now. All right? The limitation to calculating residual feed intake is the fact that we have to be able to measure individual feed intake. Right? And up until the last 20 years, we didn't have the technology capable to do that. All right? But we do. At Raymond Memorial Farm, has been previously mentioned, we have this GrowSafe system. These are feed bunks, individual feed bunks, and they set on a pair of load cells. All right? They weigh with an accuracy to a half of a gram, and they collect a weight every half second. Okay? Pretty intense technology when you think about the amount of data points you get in a single day from this, let alone over a 100-day feeding period, how many we're going to get. All right, massive amounts of data, so we can look at the actual intake of feed. What did they eat, and lots of other things relative to their feeding behavior, which Dr. Wilson's worked on some. Okay? We've had this since 2003 at Raymond Memorial Farms. All right? But we are always looking at diets that will fit in the size in that month. All right? Those load cells will weigh up to 300 pounds, so we can't put any more than 300 pounds in that bunk at one time. All right? So to take that intake value that we can find, that we measure, and calculate a feed efficiency value as residual feed intake, all we're really doing is taking what we measure as an intake, and we're predicting a feed intake based upon how much weight the animal gained and how big it was. All right, what's the average weight was during the test period. All right, and if we can compare those, an intake on their y-axis versus what we expect that they should have eaten based on how much weight they gained and how big they were, here we can start to fit a line through the middle of that. Okay? The animals that are above that line, they ate more than we expected that they should. The ones that were below that line ate a lot less than they should have needed to eat to gain the weight they did for the body size that they were. Okay? The residual is the difference between where this point is and the line. So we can look at this animal here, well below that line. All right? Very, very feed efficient. In comparison to this animal here, well above the line. Ate significantly more than it should have for the performance level that it showed exhibited. Okay? Look at this a little bit more detailed. All right? This is examples of bulls from our bull test program. All right? So with this residual feed intake trait, we want negative values. All right? A minus RFI means they ate less than they should have. That's a good thing. All right? Eating less feed. So we have those values here. Here's an RFI. Minus 3.3, slightly positive. About 3.5 pounds per day of feed dry matter different consumption for these two bulls. All right, if we look over here, this one gained 4.4 pounds today, 4.44. This one gained 4.45. We got the same performance for 3.5 pounds of feed dry matter less per day. Which one do you want? All right, let's look at it from an economic standpoint. That 3.5 pounds of dry matter equals actually 5.8 pounds of the feed that's actually delivered to the bunk. All right, that ration cost us $113 a ton, or about 5.5 cents a pound. Over 140 days, he ate 812 pounds less feed. 812 pounds less feed in 140 days to get the same amount of performance, which $46 in savings just in that feed. That's pretty good, right? The neat thing about this trait is because the way we calculate it, right, we're adjusting for these differences in average daily gain. We use a standard amount to predict that maintenance requirement. You know, I said it was the only one that actually looked at maintenance. So the differences that we're actually seeing here, in my mind, are really differences in maintenance requirements. Right? They're differences in the amount of feed used to keep the animal alive. So this bull actually has more feed left over to do production with after he's met his maintenance requirements. All right? So, to tie in with the previous two speakers and how we fit this from an environmental standpoint, what has research told us that selection for this trait will result in? Well, one is reduced feed intake. Okay? I've shown you that. The other, quite interestingly, you eat less, you're probably going to poop less. All right, reduced manure production. So we're not going to put as much in, so we don't put as much out. Less of that can enter into the water table. All right. The other one, if you've been watching things happening in Washington lately, relative to cows being their sole contributor to climate change, well, we can fix it. All right? We get reduced methane emissions as a result of selecting for this trait. Pretty interesting stuff, right? But we're measuring that in a barn, all right? We're putting animals, this is where cows live, all right? Anybody have a recognize where that may be? South of Interstate 64, all right? Just on Route 60 west of Lewisburg at the base of Tuckahoe Hill and side of Strickland Lane. All right, beautiful part of West Virginia. All right? Cows live here. This is where they are at. And over 80% of what they consume, even in conventional feedlot finishing systems, is grazed forage. So how do we translate what we measure in the dry lot facility with a different diet to animals that are actually grazing? And that's where we want to take the next step with this project. Okay? So we are going to incorporate some new technology from the same company, Grossi. Right? They've made a wonderful donation to the university to help us with this. Right? And how we're able to do this is, these are called Grossi beef units, but this little system right here is actually setting on load cells. It's a scale. Right? The correlation between weighing an animal from its front 2 feet and put all 4 feet on a scale, very consistent and very high. So we can make that adjustment to a whole body weight by just weighing the front end of the animal very easily. Okay? We can weigh the animal. We can measure feed consumption with a similar system as we have. Right? But that's not what we have. The other one, tying into your previous 2 presentations, water intake. All right, we're worried about water. So, we're looking at that. The first phase, and this is a very broad brush of what we're talking about from a research plan, as we begin to generate data, then that will help dictate where the next question, the next project should come. And so the initial part of this will be installing this technology within the dry lot feeding facility, in the barn. Okay? So we can start to look at water intake of animals in that scenario. Okay? We start to evaluate water intake, get a handle on it there, because we're very comfortable with the data from a feed intake standpoint, and we can start to look at relationships that may help us understand more once we get to a pasture scenario. All right? The second thing that we want to do is we're going to move that technology on to pasture. We're going to take it where the animals spend most of their life and where they consume most of their feed. And the idea here is once we can use the intake measurement of water along with our body weight measurements to try to develop a proxy for forage intake. So we can compare that to some very traditional methods of estimating forage intake, using rising plate meter to estimate forage mass and forage disappearance, marker technology to actually look at the passage rate of that, and we can start to determine how much an individual animal is consumed. Right? This is very classical research from a forage standpoint. It's not one that too many people want to spend their career doing, because you will spend a career to publish a few papers. Right? It's a long-term approach going through this. Right? So, initially we're going to do this very small plot. We want to use yearling steers. Why? All right? No disrespect to the females in the room, but cows are complicated. Right? When we start adding estrus cycles, gestation, what's the impact of a fetus on energy requirements, lactation. All right? The steer's pretty simple. All right? He doesn't have any of that to deal with. So the idea is take as much of those other sources of variation out so that we can make some sense out of the data we're utilizing or creating or generating. All right? And this will be compared to those animals after we have phenotyped them in our traditional measurements. All right? The other component of this is how do cool season forages grow? Are they consistent throughout a growing season? No. So we're thinking about this from a phasing standpoint and looking at those separate phases of forage growth. Early spring, rapid growth. All right, we have our summer slump of cool season forage growth, and then we get another more rapid growth rate in fall. All right. Next kind of phase to that would be to start looking at those different animal classes for one. All right. After we've started to make some progress there. The other thing that we're very interested in doing is developing divergently selected populations for this feed efficiency trade. Start to just develop enterprise budgets for individual populations as they move in separate directions from a feed efficiency standpoint. Right? And in doing so, then we create another research tool by having these divergent populations to look at their impact on the environment. How do those animals impact the environment they're in? All right. We also need to go from these small plot sizes to something that's realistic in terms of a grazing management system. So we need to expand the size of the plot so we can look at that. And when we do that, then, holy cow, we open up a lot more questions in terms of the animal behavior and how that's going to impact things. And then can we look at our environmental impact of those different grazing systems? Finally, developing a divergently selected population is not something that happens overnight. Since we're generating one calf per year, per female, generation interval is 5 to 6 years in beef cattle, so it's going to take a little bit of time. And add those other animal classes as I meant. Hopefully we can get to a point of using a system like this deployed on grass, right, to estimate feed efficiency values in our replacement females in the environment in which they're going to be maintained throughout their life. All right, so this is just how this would look. What we're going to deploy are these completely mobile systems. They're on something similar to like an oil field rig map, right? And they have a battery pack here that's going to run this. The solar panel charges, and then you see these little antennas here. They transmit data wirelessly that way back to our computer systems. And we can monitor both a supplement for using mineral intake and also water. I believe there was one more. I may be incorrect. All right. That's what I have to share with you. This is as I said, this is a broad plan at this point in time, and it's very difficult when you start to look at what our opportunities are to try to narrow your focus and into something that's very manageable from a research standpoint. But the opportunities are really tremendous. We have a wonderful partner that we're developing relationships with, the Noble Research Institute in Oklahoma. They have, and this is actually a picture of some of theirs, where they have actually deployed this system already. The thing that we have that is unique is they're, compared to them, they're deploying their systems in pasture scenarios where they're doing small grain monoculture pastures. Okay? A lot of wheat and those kind of things that are grazed in some southern, south central Oklahoma and Texas. Right? They can take another variable out of this that we cannot, because we're going to use multi-species, mixed species, cool season pastures to do it. So we've got something that's maybe a little bit more realistic for our environment and our producers in terms of what we're utilizing. That's all I have. If Dr. Wilson would like to add to it, he's more than welcome. So thank you for your attention. We're going to try to see if we can. I mean, if you look at that, what is something that they're going to consume consistently on a daily basis? Feed and water. We have to use the one that we can measure because we can control access to water. Right? In a grazing scenario, we can't control access to feed. So So we can limit access to water and actually and measure that. So the idea is to see, can we utilize water intake as a means to predict how much grass there is? Well, because we're going to use the traditional methods of measuring forage intake. So that's where you're going to actually measure the amount of forages in a specific area, put the animals in there, you measure the disappearance, so you know how much they ate. Okay? And then we actually dose them with different markers to see and measure the amount of time it takes to get that marker through the digestive system. Right? And we can start to back calculate the amount each individual animal consumed. Right? From how fast it got through their system. It kind of gives us a prediction of volume that's going through there when we get the amount that's going through. So that's the initial way to determine, and that's the best way that is available scientifically to determine intake of forage in a grazing scenario. So initially, that's what we're going to have to do, is try to relate those two and see if that relationship exists. That's why we've got to start with very small plots before you get to what would normally be a grazing system size area.